Hello everyone, this is Christian Mel at Exiton Interactive, and in this video we are going to create a few other classes here that will help us to control the DOM. By the time we are done with this video and probably the next video, we'll have a way to basically interact with the DOM in sense for the controls for focusing, and so I've laid the groundwork for the animation. So to get an idea of what we're talking about here, I'm just looking at this image and to sort of define our terms. What I'm looking at here is defining again three classes. The first one, or the most basic, is the control group. Now typically the control group is what I think of when I have a label, an input, and a button. That's the control group. A control pair is not surprisingly is two control groups, and we'll call one left and one right. And then the collection of all control pairs is put into the control pair collection. A few notes to make is I said that the control group is typically a label, an input and a button, but the remember me area here is also going to be a control group. So that div plus its input, label, and span will be a control group. And also, every control group is going to be part of a control pair. So in the case of password, confirm password, email, and confirm email, it's pretty obvious what that means. But if you have the case of, say, the username and remember me, what it will be is the username group here will be the left control group, and the right control group will just be null, okay, or undefined. So that just gives us an overview of what we are going to accomplish or attempt to accomplish in this video. So let me get rid of that and get to Visual Studio here, bring the notes up, and we will start. So our whole goal is to be able to manipulate the DOM, so animate controls, focus controls. So we need to have access to the DOM elements for each control, and to do that we're going to go into, starting off with our template file. So we'll go into the components folder, and and on the testing here I still have these, so let's get rid of those files there, make sure they're gone. They are. Okay, now we're ready to go. So let's go into the template file, so the authenticator.component.pug file, and so that we can get reference to these DOM elements, we're going to have IDs attached to them. So we're going to start within the form control group mixin, and we're going to put an ID on this form control group. So what we're going to do is put our parentheses here, and we're going to bind to the ID attribute for this div. And again, we're going to bind. Again, we're going to use the square brackets. And like I said, we're attribute.id is what we're binding to. And we'll say equals, and we'll put our backticks. And we'll use the dollar, curly brackets, curly braces, key, and group ID. So if you think about it, the key is going to come in, it's going to be one of these. So say for instance the email, so it'll be control email and then group ID. So control email group ID. So that's going to be the name of the property that we're going to put on our TypeScript file. But before we can get to that, we also need to remember that we're doing it separately for the remember me area. So the remember me control group, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bind to the attribute, the ID attribute. And that's going to be, so we'll just put control remember me group ID. Okay, so that takes care of modifying the template to add the IDs. So we'll go back to our TypeScript file, so the authenticator.component.ts file. Okay, so what we need to do is to come down here, and we're going to add in some getters just like we did for the keys. We're about to adjust where those are here in a second. Let me come down here. And so like I said, we want public get control email group ID. And from that, we'll just say return, and we'll return control group email. Perfect. All right, so I'm making these all public. Let me just copy these in instead of typing them. So we have the control email confirm group ID. So it's the same formation. Control password group ID, control password confirm group ID, remember me, and username, all the same shape. And of course, like I mentioned, I made them public. Here I made a mistake before. As you can tell, it doesn't make a bit of difference in the actual outputted JavaScript, but I actually want these to be down here. So you may think of this as the OCD kicking in. What I'm going to do here is, so public, when I look at this, tells me, hey, these things may be used somewhere else. So you can't just freely change them willy-nilly. So these are being used. The name of them is being used in the template. So I want to make those public to just remind myself that, in fact, is being used somewhere else. So let's save those. Make sure it all builds correctly. We go back and it's telling us everything's up to date. Let's take a look at the elements. And if we look in inputs container, if we get down far enough, we see that there's an ID being applied to the username control group. The remember me has the ID. And if we look inside these, we should see IDs for password and password confirm, and IDs for email and email confirm. So we're having the actual IDs are being applied to our control groups. Let's return back to Visual Studio here. So the next thing we're going to do is to start creating those additional classes. So I'm going to right click on the Authenticator folder. I'm going to choose Add New Item. And it's a TypeScript file we're going to create, and we're going to call it control-group.ts. So each control group is going to be responsible for any access or manipulation of the DOM that we need to do. So in order to do that, we're going to import, and we're going to import the DOM reader service that we created earlier. DOM reader.service home. And we will look, hopefully, yep, managed to type that all correctly. Okay, so, there's two methods basically we can go about things, in terms of constructing things. Like for our component, in the constructor, we just basically list each thing that we're going to need within the constructor. Of course, we're doing that we're doing that because of we need this stuff to be injected by Angular. A lot of times, though, I just want to pass in an object, and that object containing all of the properties that I need. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. Before we do that, I'm going to export an interface. And that's going to be the control group config. I use the suffix config a lot of times to mean that this thing is going to be used when creating an object. So what we're going to want passed in when we're creating a control group is going to be a DOM reader instance. And we're also going to want to be passed in the ID for the control group. Now we can define our class, export class control group. And it's going to it's going to have a reference to the DOM reader. First we'll set it to null, and read only ID, and this is a string, null. We make our constructor, and in there what we're going to do is take in the config, which is the control group config. and we're going to use that. This dot DOM reader is equal config dot DOM reader ID is equal to config dot ID. And just so that we have something to look at telling us that it's working, we're just going to say creating, and we're going to do the this dot ID. So that's our, for the moment, our control group class. I'm going to return to the authenticator folder, right click, choose add new item, again a TypeScript file, and we're going to create the next one, which is the control pair .ts. Okay, so in here we're going to start by importing a couple things. We'll begin control group. So we're going to import it from the control group file, and we need the I control group config. We also need the control group. Just as we did previously, we're going to export an interface, which is the I control pair config. So what do we need when we can create a control pair? Well, we need a left, which is going to contain the I control group config for the left one, and right is going to be optional, so we'll put the question mark, and it's still the same type of config. So we're going to export now a class, and that's the control pair. So the control pair will have private read only, and left, which is going to be a control group. Set it to null, private read only, and this is right, control group, set it equal to null. Now we're ready to do a little constructor action. Again, we'll take in the config, I control pair config. And in this one, we're just going to say this left equal to new control group and config.left. Next, we'll say if and type of config.right. If that's not equal to undefined, then we want this dot right to be equal to new control group and config.right. So we'll save that. And of course, we need one more. So we can return to the folder, right click, choose add new item. And if you remember, this one's going to be called something. It's going to be called control pair collection.ts. Just because I don't want to type it anymore. That we need reference to. Okay, so one of the main purposes for the control pair collection is to, when it's created, it will get reference to all of the properties or all the objects that each control group needs, so that we don't have to continually pass it in. We'll just pass it into the constructor for the collection, and the collection will be responsible for passing it on when creating pairs. So that's, we need the DOM reader service for that. We're also going to say import and from control pair. So for control pair, we need the control pair and import from, and this one's from the control group. What we want to is bring in the I control group config. And same thing for this. We're going, well, actually, we're going to export two interfaces. So export interface, and I create pair config ID string. So when I create a pair, I'm going to need a string ID. And I'm not sure whether I actually use that. We'll see here. And then when I actually create the collection itself, we're going to need, so export interface, and this one is the control pair collection config. Okay. And it needs, I need access, I need an instance of the DOM reader. All right. Now we're ready to export our class. And private read only DOM reader is equal to null to start with. Private read only, and the pairs. So this is a collection of pairs. So the pair is going to hold is going to be an object. Of course, we need a little more than just an object. What we'll have is one that we can access its properties through a string, and when we do that, we'll get a pair back. We need the constructor. First, we have a config, which is the I control pair collection config, which gives us the DOM reader. And next, what we need is a way to actually create pairs. So we're going to create a method called create. Oops. Hit the right buttons. So the create method is going to take in a left, which is I create pair config, and the right, which is an I create. It's a may or optional to be passed in. Okay, so next what we'll create is a const and left config. So what we're going to do basically is take the create pair config and use information in it to create the configuration for an actual group, right? Because we need to create a group, and that's what this one will do for the left one anyway. And so we need inside of it, and this is, we'll say as I control group config. So inside there we'll have a DOM reader, which is this DOM reader, and we'll tell it the ID, and its ID is left.id. So that's the configuration that object that we need for the left control. Now, of course, if we say if and type of right, if that's equal to undefined, all we need to do is create the left one. So we'll say this underscore pairs, and the indexer for it is the ID of the left control. We'll say new control pair, and we need to pass in the information. In this case, it's the left is equal to the left config, and we're going to return if that's the only one we need to create. Okay, so now if the right is defined, what we'll do is we'll say constant pair is equal to new control pair, left, same left config, right as the DOM reader, and its ID set to right.id. So now we have the pair created, and the reason I'm doing it that way is that I want to say this dot underscore pairs. So pairs left.id is equal to pair. So we have a reference to the pair using the left ID, and we'll just also have a reference to the pair using the right ID. That way I can get the pair as long as I pass in one of the two IDs. Save that, and let's see. So the next thing we need to do is actually use those classes, and we'll go to the authenticator.component.ts file. Now the control groups, of course, are all about manipulating the DOM, focusing an element, like I said, animation. So we have to be careful. The DOM for our component does not always exist during the entire life cycle of our authenticator component, of our Angular component. It's only available after a certain point. So we can be careful. We can do it one of two ways. We can create the controls, say in the ng on init method that we've already had, or that we've already implemented last time. And then we just have to know that we can't access the DOM right away, or put other methods to access the DOM or so forth. But for me, it's easier if we just create the control groups after the DOM is available to us. And to do that, what we're going to do, so just as we did on init, that was an interface, we're going to import another interface, and that's the after view init interface. And then we're going to come down to our class definition. We're going to say that it implements also the after view init interface. We'll get our red squiggly for a minute till we implement the method. But before I do that, I want to add in a little bit more up here. We'll put private read only. This will be a control pair collection. Of course, I forgot to import the reference to it to begin with. So let's go back up. We'll say import and from, and that's from the control-pair.collection file. And we're importing the control pair collection. Perfect. Pair collection equal to null for the moment. And we'll go down to the constructor. What we'll do is create that. Say this dot control pair collection is equal to new control pair collection. And it takes an object. Right now that object only has one requirement, which is the DOM reader. So we'll say it's this dot underscore DOM reader. So now we've created our collection. What we need to do is populate it, and if we go down here, we'll see that the method that we need to implement is public. Let's say yeah, it's the ng after view init method. And what we'll do inside of here is to say this dot, and we'll do the control pair collection dot create. So we want to create a pair. I'm just going to stick on and did them in alphabetical order. So we'll do the email first. So left one, we have ID, and the ID is this dot control email group ID. So that's the left. Next, we'll move down to the right, and that's going to have an ID that's equal to this dot control email confirm group ID. And hope my little red squigglies go away here. What don't you like? It's there. Calm down. And I made a mistake, and it looks like in the pair definition. Yep. So I accidentally used the wrong interface. So this should be a pair config. You save that and go back. And great, finally, our little red squigglies have gone away. Instead of typing them, I'm going to copy and paste them in. So that's the email. We have the password. So password is group ID is left, password confirm is right. Next we'll do the remember me. So again, there is no right one for the remember me. And last but not least, the username. So we use control username group ID is passed in. All right, so let's save that. All right, now let's return to, let's see what we're gonna look at the console, and we'll see that we have our creating statements in the console for all of them. Email confirm, password confirm, remember me, and username. So we are creating them correctly. So we'll return to Visual Studio. I think the first thing that we're going to modify is the control group. So as I mentioned, this is going to be the way that we have access to manipulating the DOM for our control groups. So what we need is access to the DOM, and we've already seen that previously in another video. So the way we're going to do it is through the element ref. So that's Angular's way of passing around the DOM for our component. And I'm going to want a reference to the element ref for every control group that I create. So I'll add it to the control group config. And what I'll do then is add in another flag or another field for it. So we'll have the private read-only underscore element ref. And if not surprisingly, we'll just come down and say this element ref is equal to config.elementRef. And one way that we're going to check that first let me implement another property or getter. Let me create a private field, private, and we'll call it group DOM. That's an HTML element. Starts out to be null. Yes, my friend, ReSharper, it's a terrible naming. Tells me, hey, it's not naming, right? I say I don't care. So we have that field. Let's create a private getter. So private get group DOM. So what we'll do is we've seen this pattern before. We'll say if this dot group DOM, if that's not equal to null, back up there, then we'll just return it. Group DOM. Otherwise, we'll say this dot group DOM is equal to this DOM reader dot find child by ID. We need to pass in the parent, which is this element ref dot native element, and we need to pass in the ID. So that will set it, and then we want to say return this dot group DOM. And there we go. So next we'll tell it to leave me alone again. And then we'll modify the console log statement here just to say this dot group DOM. Perfect. We'll return to the control pair collection. As I said, this is going to be our method, or the place that we hold references to everything that has to be passed in to each control group. So we're going to need the element reference. Do that in when we create the group, the collection. We'll also pass in the element ref. And modify, we need a field to hold the reference. So private read-only underscore element reference. And now we need to add that to the constructor. So now we'll have access to the element ref. And we need to go down to our create and see our little errors that are running around. What we want in the left config is to say element ref is equal to this element ref. And so we see that one for the left. We also need to do it for the right. Give it a moment. Good to go. And last squiggly we need to take care of is, of course, in our authenticator.component.ts file. If we go back to the constructor, again, we're creating the pair collection. We need to pass in the element ref to it. So element ref this dot. Go ahead and save that. And if we go back to the browser, we will wait for it to rebuild. And now that it's rebuilt, we see that we have access to the actual DOM elements for each of our control groups. Right? There's username. Thinking that once again I have a problem, but no. Okay, so I think that will do it for this video. So we've created the infrastructure. We have our 3 new classes. The control group class has reference to the DOM for the control groups. Next video, we're actually going to use it. We'll create the ability to focus the input within a control group, which will then allow us to do some, or to begin work on the navigation, the keyboard navigation. So if you hit tab, it goes to the right, control, shift tab, enter, all that. So as usual, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch the video. And I think at the beginning, I forgot to mention, of course, you can find a link to the article in the description below. And if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please leave them in the comments section. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.